The Galactic Dominion had conquered thousands of planets, dismantling civilizations with a mix of brute force and overwhelming technology. To them, Earth was nothing more than another primitive rock, orbiting an unremarkable star, inhabited by a species that still used combustion engines and thought duct tape was an engineering solution. The invasion briefing was almost an afterthought, one of the shorter presentations in Dominion history. "This planet is primarily water," General Zyrol had said, gesturing toward a holographic display. "A few landmasses with underdeveloped cities and excessive vegetation. We estimate planetary control within 6 days, tops." The officers murmured in agreement. Their species had long abandoned the concept of forests. The idea that anything worthwhile could hide among trees was laughable. Armored divisions would roll in, soldiers would march, resistance, if any, would crumble. It was a perfect strategy, just like every invasion before. That confidence remained intact for about 3 minutes after landing. The first drop ships touched down deep within what humans called the Amazon rainforest. Immediately, things felt wrong. The air was thick, pressing into their lungs like an overenthusiastic hug from a species that did not understand personal space. Visibility was a joke. Thick foliage swallowed their infrared scans, and an ungodly chorus of shrieking insects drowned out their comms. One unfortunate soldier stepped out, only to immediately sink knee-deep into the mud. He spent the next 2 minutes flailing like a malfunctioning battle droid before his squad mates yanked him free. "This planet smells," one of the officers muttered, slapping something that had landed on his face. "And something just tried to drink my blood." "Impossible," another officer scoffed. "Blood-drinking organisms went extinct on civilized planets eons ago." "Then tell that to whatever's currently sucking on my arm." It wasn't just the insects. The jungle itself seemed to pulse with unseen threats. The trees stretched impossibly high, their twisted branches forming a suffocating ceiling. The undergrowth rustled, but their scanners showed nothing. Leaves dripped moisture, thick vines curled like waiting serpents, and strange calls echoed from the depths, sometimes distant, sometimes unervingly close. Still, the Dominion soldiers pressed forward. They had numbers, superior weaponry, and an unshakable belief in their own supremacy. This was just another backwater planet. Just another primitive battlefield. Just another easy victory. Then the first squad went silent. One moment, Sergeant XYLT and his team were trudging ahead, their boots squelching in the mud. The next, their comms cut out. No gunfire, no distress calls, just dead air. A search team was dispatched, grumbling as they hacked through dense undergrowth. What they found made their mandibles click in confusion. Weapons littered the jungle floor, untouched. Helmets rested on tree branches, their owners nowhere in sight. Deep claw marks raked across the armor plating of an abandoned hovercraft. But the worst part? The tracks. The missing soldiers had been walking in one direction, then suddenly, they weren't. Their footprints simply vanished. The officer in charge swallowed hard. Perhaps a localized teleportation anomaly? A distant howl answered, low and guttural. It didn't sound like a teleportation anomaly. Someone adjusted their rifle grip. "We should fall back and regroup. We do not retreat from planets that haven't even developed space travel," barked their commander. The jungle disagreed. Without warning, movement erupted from the trees. Shadows twisted, and before the aliens could react, something struck from above. A Dominion soldier was yanked into the canopy with a strangled yelp. Another spun wildly as his weapon was torn from his hands. The squad opened fire in all directions, energy bolts scorching leaves and shattering branches. But there was nothing to hit. Another soldier vanished. Then another. "Back to the drop ship," someone screamed. Panic spread faster than a planetary plague. Their once pristine formation dissolved as trained warriors broke into a full sprint, tripping over roots and slamming into low-hanging vines. One particularly unfortunate officer ran straight into a tree, crumpling like a poorly assembled battle droid. He didn't even have time to recover before something dragged him backward into the shadows. When they finally reached the drop ship, panting and wide-eyed, their commanding officer demanded answers. What, he seethed, was that? Silence. The surviving soldiers looked at one another, their mandibles twitching. Nobody wanted to say it. Nobody wanted to admit that their elite, genetically enhanced, technologically superior warriors had been outclassed. Then the comms crackled to life. A transmission, faint but clear, laced with human amusement. Welcome to the jungle. And just like that, the Galactic Dominion realized this conquest would not be the 6-day cakewalk they had envisioned. The Galactic Dominion had a serious problem, and for the first time in recorded history, they didn't know how to fix it. Their soldiers, hand-picked from the finest genetic stock, trained on the most hostile worlds, and equipped with the most advanced technology, were losing. Not just losing, they were being hunted. The jungle was alive in ways they had never imagined. The shadows moved, the trees whispered, and the air carried sounds that made their antennae twitch in ways they really didn't appreciate. But it wasn't just the jungle. It was the humans in it. Sergeant Callahan crouched behind thick foliage, watching the panicked patrol ahead. They were jumpy. Good. That meant they were easier to break. The aliens had fancy armor and energy rifles, but none of that helped when they were too terrified to blink without permission. "Think they're ready for another round?" whispered Corporal Diaz, perched in a tree above. Callahan smirked. "Oh, absolutely." With a flick of his wrist, he signaled the others. A second later, a crude but effective tripwire snapped, sending an alien sprawling face-first into the mud. Before it could scramble up, something slithered onto its back, a large, very confused anaconda. The soldiers screamed, flailing as the snake coiled, while its squadmates stood frozen, unsure whether to shoot, help, or run. A moment later, they ran. A few well-placed rounds from suppressed rifles sent them scattering in all directions. The jungle swallowed them instantly. Callahan didn't even bother to chase. They'd be back, bringing reinforcements, and that was exactly what he wanted. The aliens were used to fighting armies. Orderly formations, clear battle lines, tactics that followed some kind of logical structure. Humans? Humans didn't do logical. They did whatever worked. And right now, what worked was making the invaders question whether they had walked into an enemy ambush or just a very aggressive ecosystem that wanted them dead. "You think Command's gonna believe them?" Diaz asked, dropping down from his perch. "Not a chance," Callahan said. "They're gonna assume they panicked and ran like cowards." Diaz grinned. So, round 3. A few miles away, Dominion Commander Threx paced inside the temporary base, mandibles clicking in frustration. Reports from his squads made no sense. Soldiers vanishing mid-patrol. Equipment failing without explanation. Weapons disappearing. One particularly nervous officer claimed a tree had attacked them, which was so absurd that Threx briefly considered ejecting him into space just to set an example. "This is nonsense," he growled, slamming a fist onto the table. "We are the Dominion. We do not lose to dirt-walking primitives." A nearby officer shifted uncomfortably. "With respect, Commander, these, primitives seem to be rather effective." Threx whirled on him. "They have no energy shielding. No exoskeleton reinforcement. Their armor is made of fabric. How are they effective?" The officer hesitated, but then another alien burst into the tent, panting heavily. "Commander, we have a problem." Threx narrowed his eyes. "You think I am not aware of that?" "No, sir. A new problem." The soldier gulped. They took Groln." The tent went silent. Groln was not an easy thing to take. A veteran of over 50 campaigns, he stood 8 feet tall, built like a war machine, with a face that looked like someone had tried and failed to carve intimidation into living stone. Entire planets had surrendered at the sight of him. Threx exhaled sharply. "Took him how?" The soldier shifted awkwardly. "We don't know. His squad was patrolling. There was a loud noise. Then he was gone." And he reached into his satchel and pulled out something small and rectangular. This was left behind. Threx grabbed it, turning it over in his hands. It was what did humans call them? A Polaroid. On it, Groln was tied to a tree, looking furious, while 3 human soldiers grinned and gave thumbs-ups in the background. Threx stared at it for a long moment, his claws tightening around the edges. "Prepare every available unit," he hissed. "We are going hunting." The jungle, however, had other plans. As soon as the Dominion forces deployed, the humans unleashed chaos. Explosions rocked the trees, but no enemies appeared. Branches snapped, but no one was there. Shadows darted between ferns, but when the soldiers fired, they hit nothing but air. Every step forward felt like another mistake, and every second made them more aware that they were not in control. Then, the real attack began. Camouflaged snipers picked off stragglers. Traps sent troops tumbling into pits. The jungle itself seemed to turn against them. Vines tangled their weapons, the mud sucked at their boots, and insects swarmed their faces. One particularly unfortunate squad stumbled into a clearing only to realize too late that it had been deliberately designed as a kill zone. The moment they stepped in, the entire perimeter erupted in gunfire. Not the flashy kind the Dominion was used to, no grand energy discharges or earth-shattering blasts. Just short, sharp cracks, each one precise. Soldiers dropped before they even had time to scream. By the time Commander Threx's main force arrived, the survivors were barely holding together. "Regroup," Threx bellowed. "Find cover." But there was no cover. The jungle belonged to the humans, and for the first time the Dominion realized they were the prey. Commander Threx had faced countless battles, but none had prepared him for this. The war on Earth was supposed to be a formality, a simple display of Dominion superiority. Yet here he was, crouched behind a fallen log, covered in mud, heart pounding in his chest as something growled in the shadows. He tightened his grip on his plasma rifle and peeked over the log. Nothing. Just dense foliage, swaying ever so slightly in the humid air. His antennae twitched. His elite forces, those carefully bred for combat, enhanced for efficiency, and trained for all terrains, were breaking. Not in an honorable last stand. Not in a valiant effort against overwhelming odds. No, they were unraveling, one soldier at a time, as the jungle devoured them whole. Nearby, Lieutenant Varn clutched his side, breathing heavily. "Commander, permission to retreat?" Threx turned slowly, fixing his second-in-command with a look of pure disbelief. "Retreat," he hissed, his mandibles clicking furiously. "We do not retreat. We are the Dominion. We—" A sudden scream tore through the trees, cutting him off. It wasn't one of their soldiers. It wasn't even human. It was something else. Every remaining soldier snapped their weapons up, scanning the darkness. "What was that?" Varn whispered. A deep, guttural howl echoed in response. And then all hell broke loose. The jungle came alive. Not with humans, but with creatures the Dominion had never encountered before. Something massive barreled through the undergrowth, slamming into the nearest squad like a freight train. Bodies flew. Plasma rifles discharged wildly into the night, illuminating flashes of fur, claws, and too many teeth. One soldier barely had time to scream before a panther-like beast tackled him into the bushes. Another Dominion trooper fired in panic, only to get yanked into the trees by a long, sinuous tail. Threx could only watch in horror as his elite troops scattered in terror. And standing at the edge of the chaos, arms crossed, expression completely unimpressed, was Sergeant Callahan. "I told you, Diaz," Callahan said, shaking his head. "They didn't believe us." Diaz, perched casually on a low-hanging branch, grinned. "You think they believe us now?" Callahan watched as a Dominion soldier sprinted past, screaming, while a particularly angry Capuchin monkey pelted him with rocks. He sighed. "Yeah. I think they get it." The plan had been simple. The jungle was already winning. All they had to do was give it a little encouragement. Traps were one thing, but animals? That was another level of psychological warfare. The aliens didn't know which sounds meant danger, which rustles signaled movement, which glowing eyes in the dark were an actual threat. And the best part? They didn't have the instincts to figure it out. The humans did. Callahan had spent years training in environments like this. He knew how to move without a sound, how to spot an ambush before it happened, how to make the jungle itself his weapon. The Dominion had spent years fighting enemies who thought like them. The problem was, humans didn't think like them. They thought worse. Down below, Threx was struggling to regain control. "Hold your positions," he bellowed, firing wildly into the trees. "We are warriors, not prey." A jaguar leaped out of nowhere, landed on a Dominion soldier's back, and dragged him screaming into the bushes. Threx paled. "Okay," he muttered. "Maybe a little retreat." His comm unit crackled to life. "Commander," a voice shrieked. They got into the base. The humans." Gunfire erupted in the background, followed by an explosion. The transmission cut off. Threx clenched his jaw. His forces weren't just being beaten. They were being dismantled. "We have to regroup," Varn panted, eyes darting wildly. "Commander, if we don't fall back now, we'll be wiped out." Threx didn't respond. He was staring at something on the ground, a simple, unassuming piece of metal, half buried in the mud. He reached down and picked it up, turning it over in his claws. A dog tag. It was old, scratched, and weathered by time. But the name was still readable: Sergeant Jonathan Callahan. Threx exhaled slowly. He'd underestimated these creatures. Not just their resilience, not just their tactics, but their history. This was not the first time humans had fought an unwinnable war in the jungle, and it would not be the first time they had won. Threx staggered through the wreckage of what was once his mighty forward base. Smoke curled into the air, mingling with the thick jungle mist, as the last remnants of his forces scrambled for cover. Plasma burns scorched the ground, craters marked the landscape, and the eerie calls of the jungle's nocturnal hunters sent chills through even the most hardened Dominion warriors. This was supposed to be a victory march, a triumphant subjugation. Instead, it had turned into a full-scale nightmare. He could barely hear over the wailing of his comm unit. "Commander, we're being overrun." The humans, the line cut to static. His antennae twitched. He didn't need reports to know what was happening. He could see it. He could hear it. And most terrifyingly, he could feel it. The humans weren't just winning. They were enjoying themselves. Sergeant Callahan's voice crackled over a hijacked Dominion frequency. "Threx, buddy, you still kicking?" Threx bared his mandibles. "You dare address me?" Yeah, fear the Dominion, and all that. "Listen, pal, you've got about 5 minutes before things get real ugly." Threx's eyes darted to the treetops. Somewhere, hidden in the dense canopy, Callahan was watching him. He had been watching him the whole time. The Dominion had brought orbital artillery, armored exosuits, and genetically enhanced super-soldiers. The humans had brought knives, vines, and an unsettling amount of enthusiasm for guerrilla warfare. Another explosion rocked the jungle, and a squad of Dominion warriors went flying. Threx snarled. "You think this is over, human?" Callahan chuckled. "Nah, not yet. But you're gonna love what happens next." A high-pitched whistling sound cut through the air. A moment later, something slammed into the ground near Threx's feet. A crude metal canister, its sides painted with a smiling cartoon monkey holding a grenade. Threx's mandibles clicked nervously. What is?" The canister popped open, releasing a cloud of thick, yellow smoke. The stench hit him like a war hammer to the face. His eyes watered. His lungs burned. His body recoiled on pure instinct. "What is this foulness?" he choked out, doubling over. Laughter rang through the trees. "Jungle surprise, my guy," Diaz called. "It's called durian gas. You ever smell a fruit that makes you want to die?" More canisters rained down. More Dominion soldiers collapsed, gagging. Some were clawing at their own helmets, desperate for fresh air. Others were blindly stumbling into human ambushes, where they were either knocked unconscious or zip-tied to a tree with an apologetic note that read, "Sorry, you lost." The Dominion's elite warriors, unstoppable in open warfare, devastating in fleet engagements, were now rolling in the mud, defeated not by superior firepower, but by the most revolting fruit in human history. Threx's vision blurred as Callahan's voice came through one last time. "All right, Commander. You've got two choices. One, stay here, gagging on jungle stink, until my boys bag you up and ship you back home in a crate labeled Jungle Loser." Threx coughed violently. "And the second?" A deep, guttural hum filled the air. The unmistakable sound of Dominion evac ships descending through the clouds. "You run," Callahan said simply. "Take your fancy army, get on those ships, and never come back." Threx trembled with rage, but he knew the truth. The Dominion had lost. The humans hadn't just beaten them. They had humiliated them. They had outthought them, outmaneuvered them, and outstanked them. "Commander," Varn wheezed, barely standing. What are your orders?" Threx clenched his fist. He turned toward the jungle one last time, searching for any sign of the humans. There was nothing. Just rustling leaves, knowing laughter, and the ever-present sense that he was nothing more than an intruder in their world. He activated his comm. "All forces, retreat." The jungle erupted with cheers.